"You stole what was mine, Jonathan." Richard's voice echoed through the mansion like thunder. He held a black briefcase to his chest, his eyes full of anger and fear. Jonathan gave a cold smile as if he had already won. "I just followed what Dad wanted. You were never worthy of the fortune." The heavy silence was broken by the metallic click of a safe being closed. There, between golden walls and family secrets, two brothers faced each other as mortal enemies. At that moment, the Parkers' millionaire empire was already doomed, and that night, one of them would not see the sunrise. The Parker family was seen as an empire in New York. Patriarch William Parker built a billion-dollar fortune in real estate, erecting skyscrapers that transformed the city's landscape. Alongside matriarch Eleanor, they raised 5 heirs, each carrying ambition, rivalries, and dark secrets that would threaten the lineage. Jonathan, the eldest, was always the natural successor. Ambitious and calculating, he inherited not only the leadership of the business, but also his father's coldness. Richard, the second, grew up in his brother's shadow, harboring resentment and an insatiable hunger for recognition. Deep down, he felt like the true heir betrayed by fate. The other 3 siblings completed the intrigue. Michael, the family lawyer, knew clauses and contracts that could destroy anyone. Claire, sophisticated and manipulative, moved behind the scenes in high society. And the youngest, Daniel, seemed distant from power but kept a watchful eye, observing every move. The Parker mansion in Manhattan was a symbol of the wealth it had acquired. Gilded rooms, original works of art, and parties attended by politicians, celebrities, and tycoons. But behind the marble walls, every laugh hid an accusation, and every look carried the shadow of distrust. The empire seemed solid, but cracks were already appearing beneath the golden sheen. The public saw glamour. The newspapers reported success stories. But inside the mansion, the atmosphere was stifling. William was aging, Eleanor controlled every gesture, and the children fought not only for the fortune, but also for the love of a father who never gave affection, only power. What would happen when greed stopped being just silence and became blood? William Parker started out as a real estate agent in Brooklyn, buying up unwanted land. With relentless vision, he transformed ruins into million-dollar buildings, creating an empire. But his obsession with power left deep scars on each of his children, who learned early on that love was measured in numbers and trust was always conditional. Jonathan, the eldest son, grew up being told he would inherit everything. This shaped him with a natural arrogance, a belief that wealth was his birthright. His victories on Wall Street were celebrated by the media, but within the family they served as a cruel reminder to his brothers that they would never reach his level. Richard always lived in contrast. Intelligent but impatient, he wanted to prove himself as capable as Jonathan. His hatred for his brother grew silently, fueled by every dinner he was sidelined at. He believed his father saw him as a failure, and this feeling fueled his secret rebellion. Michael, the third, preferred the law to direct disputes. He became the family lawyer, mastering contracts and legal loopholes. But in the silence of his office, he accumulated information that could be turned into weapons. He was the guardian of the Parker fortune's darkest secrets, and also the one with the greatest power to manipulate the inheritance's fate. Claire, the only daughter, understood the power game better than anyone. While her brothers fought over business deals, she cultivated social influence. Her dinners brought together senators, her secrets were whispered behind the scenes. Claire didn't need coffers full of money. She had something even more dangerous, people in her debt. Daniel, the youngest, was always seen as the fragile one, the dreamer. But his apparent naivete hid watchful eyes. He didn't compete openly, but rather took notes, memorized and observed. Daniel knew that in a family driven by greed, the one who remained silent could be the one who delivered the final blow. Eleanor, the matriarch, controlled everything with an iron fist. Her smiles were rare, her criticisms constant. But behind the discipline lay fear. She knew the extent to which each son was capable of betraying the empire, and on silent nights she wondered if the legacy she and William created would, in fact, be the ruin of the family itself. The Parker fortune wasn't just money, it was a treasure, tainted by illegal dealings. Rumors spoke of contracts with corrupt politicians, acquisitions bought with bribes, and even properties built on shady deals. To outsiders, it was an empire. To his children, it was a poisoned inheritance, ready to explode. The first sign of a crack came when Jonathan closed a billion-dollar deal on Wall Street without consulting his brothers. The headlines trumpeted his victory, but at home the mood was one of outrage. Richard accused him of wanting everything for himself. Michael spotted suspicious clauses. Claire heard rumors of cheating. Daniel, silent, just smiled. Every family achievement was a wound, every business meeting an undeclared war. Within that gilded mansion, there was no trust, only temporary alliances. The question wasn't whether there would be betrayal, but who would have the courage to pull the trigger first, and at what cost? The public saw wealth, parties, and luxury. But behind the walls of the Parker residence, the real spectacle was invisible. Secrets whispered in hallways, contracts hidden in safes, looks filled with hatred. And in the heart of this millionaire family, the truth was clear. Someone would die for their fortune. It was only a matter of time. The Parker empire dominated New York with skyscrapers that shone like bars of gold. The fortune seemed inexhaustible. Hotels on Fifth Avenue, penthouses in Central Park, yachts on the Hudson. But all wealth carries a price. On marble walls, they echoed secret, sentient mysteries that should never see the light. Who prospers without hiding something? Jonathan displayed his Wall Street victories like trophies. In each cover photo, a practiced smile, a Swiss watch, a toast to another wealth. However, in the footnotes, there were hidden truths. Risky derivatives, phantom guarantees, consortiums that smelled like a scam. The fortune grew, confidence did not. Where ambition ends and begins, disloyalty. Eleanor transformed the mansion into a stage of power, dinners with senators, gallery owners, CEOs. The expensive perfume, the gleaming silver, the discreet jazz. Behind the glitter, confidences whispered in long corridors. She knew every secret. Did you know that, as a family, betrayal begins between the lines of affection? The question was, who would give the first stab in the back? Claire dominated the social circuit. She collected rare invitations, expensive favors, and juicy scoops. Her beauty was showcased on camera, but her weapon was invisible, mysteries that were worth millions. Smile and listen. One word less, one truth more. In New York, the value of a treasure can be measured by whoever wants to silence him. Michael, the lawyer, kept keys and codes. His office had reinforced doors and a discreet safe. Inside, contracts, attachments, and amendments that supported the empire. He called it creative compliance. Others would call it coup elegant, with a click dry, locked away papers that could demolish a fortune whole. Daniel watched in silence, walking through corridors where time seemed suspended. He saw family betrayal in small gestures, a fleeting glance, a cold toast, an icy hug. He wrote it down. He understood that every mystery has a breaking point, and at the center of it all was a black paste that appeared and disappeared like a trick. Summer arrived in the Hamptons with parties that cost what many don't earn in a lifetime. The Parkers' yacht cut through the water like a blade. Laughter, champagne, promises. But as night fell, Richard saw Jonathan on the phone, his voice low, the numbers encrypted. There was secrets too expensive, and betrayal it smells. He felt it. At the top of the Park Avenue condominium, a safe hidden behind a Warhol painting held a treasure. Flash drives, a contract with obscure clauses, photos of private meetings. The metallic click. The lock was music to Jonathan. To Richard, it was a warning siren. Why lock something that's supposedly cool? A blood-stained mansion didn't exist yet, but the metaphor was already floating around the halls. The Parkers celebrated philanthropic donations while, backstage, brokers exchanged suitcases, secrets circulated like coins, and a hidden fortune grew in discreet accounts. What happens when empire is supported by sand? An investigative journalist called Claire. I received documents about forced takeovers in Brooklyn. She hung up smiling, but her gaze hardened. Hidden truths found a way. The strategy? Invite the reporter to dinner, seduce with wealth, confuse with brilliance. Luxury is a perfect fog for betrayal. Michael spotted a silent clause in Jonathan's agreement. Preferential liquidation in case of extreme event. Extreme event. Murder account. Killed by fortune creates priority. He closed the file, his throat dry. Some words are bridges, others are chasms. And that sentence felt like a leap of no return. Eleanor received an anonymous recording. Voices of her children discussing inheritance, veiled threats, disloyalty roar. The hissing sound, a whisper cold. He doesn't deserve the throne. The matriarch pressed pause. She knew that pride turns into a blade. What keeps you together when treasure is what divides the most? On the terrace overlooking Central Park, Jonathan toasted with foreign investors. He spoke of wealth, expansion, new funds. The glass clinked, Atlim nervous. Richard watched, imagining his father hearing this. William had taught him never bet the house. Jonathan had already mortgaged his father's soul. Empire. Daniel found an envelope with no return address in the library. Inside was an old photo. William Parker shaking hands with a disgraced politician. On the back was a note. All treasure has a trail. Daniel felt the wind hit the window, a beatenry. Some mysteries do not want to be revealed. Others demand it. A rumor spread through Manhattan. A former partner was preparing a dossier. Hidden fortune, offshore, laundering. That same day, the safe was opened, the black briefcase moved, and a key disappeared. Jonathan feigned normalcy. Michael counted deadlines. Claire smiled for photos. Richard clenched his fists. Family betrayal took shape. In the art room, a painting was crooked. A tiny detail, a huge consequence. Daniel pulled back the panel and found a second, smaller, modern safe. A beep confirmed, access denied. Who else knew about that? If there's a safe to protect a safe, there's a secret that is worth more than itself fortune. The night of the charity gala brought sparkling dresses and empty promises. Backstage, the click with a pen signed something that shouldn't exist. Emergency transition agreement. Signatures flew, eyes avoided eyes, music covered the whisper and betrayal, and a guest discreetly left a flash drive with Claire. Michael, alone in his office, read a phrase that chilled the air. Irrevocable transfer. It turned power to dust, wealth in debt. Secretin sentence. He leaned his forehead against the cold wood, heard only thetic tack of the clock. Sometimes the first murder is the one of trust. Then the rest falls. Richard walked into the empty room and saw the black folder on the table. Inside, the contract. Beside it, a still damp glass. Smell of whiskey, the click distant from closing doors, footsteps that didn't want witnesses. He understood too late. When the disloyalty becomes the norm, someone always ends up killed by fortune. The folder remained open. It was a rainy night in Manhattan. Thunder reverberated like an omen as William Parker, already weakened, called Michael into the office. The safe was opened with the metallic click that echoed heavily. From inside, he removed an ancient envelope, sealed with red wax. Here is what will keep or destroy our family. Michael held the envelope with trembling hands. He recognized its symbolic weight. A secret will. William coughed, his voice rough. They can't know about this yet. Not until I'm gone." The hard look in his eyes spoke louder than words. Michael understood. That paper was dynamite inside a house already about to explode. The document didn't just distribute the fortune, it changed everything. Jonathan wouldn't inherit alone. Richard would have a larger share, and an additional clause named Daniel as guardian of part of the estate. Hidden fortune. What seemed like justice was, in fact, a war sentence. No Parker would accept losing territory. Michael returned the envelope to the safe. The sharp thud of the door closing echoed like a verdict, but his mind couldn't rest. He knew that the moment this was revealed, the Parker house would become a battlefield. It would be family betrayal against blood, contracts against trust. Eleanor, the matriarch, realized something. She watched Michael in the dining room, pale and restless. "What do you know that you haven't told us?" she asked quietly. He looked away, but it was too late. Mothers always know. Eleanor didn't need the whole truth to sense there was a clause capable of setting fire to your empire. Jonathan was suspicious of his lawyer brother's silence. He decided to investigate. At 3 in the morning, he entered the office and rummaged through drawers. He found only a partial copy, crossed out lines, obscured passages, but reading one word was enough to make the ground shake: redistribution. To him, it sounded like robbery masquerading as justice. Richard received an anonymous phone call. The distorted voice said, "There's a document that proves you're more than you think you are. It's in storage, but not for long." His heart raced. For the first time, he believed he was right to feel deceived, and that conviction would turn to fury. Claire, returning from a party, found a note under the door. "Look in the smaller safe behind the war hall. The truth is there." The note was signed with a single letter. D. She didn't know if it was Daniel or someone playing with her mind. But the detail was enough to fuel further intrigue. Daniel, in fact, knew more than he let on. He knew of the existence of 2 wills. The first, public, already known. The second, sealed in silence. The youngest watched patiently, as if he were in the final stages of a long chess game. Each move of the brothers only confirmed fortune was a time bomb. William's health declined. Doctors milled about. Nurses whispered. Jonathan stayed by his father's side, not out of affection, but rather for control. Richard rarely appeared. Claire approached to curry favor. Michael tried to keep up appearances. Daniel, silent, was the only one who seemed to listen to the old man, perhaps because he already knew his fate. One morning, Michael secretly opened the safe. He removed the envelope and read it alone. The document spoke of Jonathan's financial lapses and acts of irresponsibility. The patriarch had officially recorded his eldest son's failings. This wasn't just a curtailment of Jonathan's power, it was a written humiliation. Michael put the document away again, but he didn't notice Richard watching him through the crack in the door. The second son couldn't hear, but the image was clear. There was something hidden that could change his future. And in that moment, Richard swore he would uncover every line of it. Secret will. Eleanor confronted William. "Why divide? Why stir up rivalries?" He sighed wearily. "Because gold that isn't divided turns into a knife. Better open war than silent poison." She closed her eyes, silent. Deep down, she knew her husband was right, but she also knew blood would be spilled. Little by little, rumors began to circulate. Servants whispered about locked safes, strange lawyers coming and going from the mansion. The walls heard secrets, the doors held heavy silences. And in the basement of the Parker residence, a feeling hung in the air that every step led to an inevitable conspiracy. Richard couldn't bear to wait any longer. He broke into the office at night. He opened drawers and kicked furniture. He found only a torn piece of paper with 3 words on it: revocation, succession, clause. That was enough to fire his imagination. He shouted to himself in the dark, "He won't take what's mine." The echo responded dryly. Jonathan hired a private investigator. Within days, he received photos of Michael breaking into safes, talking to lawyers, and hiding documents. The eldest son sneered. "My brother thinks he can defeat me with papers, but papers burn. What he doesn't know is that I don't play fair." And that promise was real. The atmosphere in the mansion became unbearable. Family gatherings were minefields. Fake smiles, clanging dishes, cold stares. Claire watched like a queen watching warriors fight in the Colosseum. She knew that soon someone would bring the document to light. And when that happened, the Parker empire would bleed from the inside out. Michael tried to protect the document, but the more he hid it, the more suspicion he aroused. Daniel, discreet, already knew where it was. Richard prowled like a hungry wolf. Jonathan made veiled threats, and Eleanor prayed silently, as if she could stop the inevitable. But in the Parker household, no prayers could save them from greed. On the night William suffered his worst seizure, all his children were present. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes were glassy. Before passing out, he murmured, "The safe, don't let it destroy you." These were his last words before silence descended. And ironically, they were also the trigger for war. Michael opened the safe after his father's collapse. He took out the envelope and placed it on the table. The brothers' gazes burned on the red wax seal. Jonathan advanced first, but Richard pushed back his chair. Claire held Daniel's arm, who remained calm. And so, the object everyone feared was finally exposed. The seal was broken. The crack sounded like a gunshot. The will fell open onto the marble table. Eyes scanned the lines. Breaths quickened. Jonathan fell silent. Richard trembled. Michael swallowed hard. Claire frowned. Daniel merely smiled. There was the truth. The fortune no longer belonged to just one person. The will made it clear. Jonathan would not inherit as expected. Some of his rights would be transferred to Richard. Daniel would be named guardian of secret accounts. Michael would have legal power over contracts, and Claire control of the company's assets. It wasn't a division. It was open war. William had left them in an open cage. Jonathan raised his voice. "This is fraud, an insult." Richard retorted furiously. "It's justice, finally. You've stolen for years. Now it's my turn." Claire crossed her arms, calculating, "Don't fight. We can still turn this to our advantage." But the truth was, no one wanted to share. Each wanted it all. The atmosphere erupted into accusations. Jonathan threatened to expose Richard's secrets. Michael cited clauses that could annul marriages. Claire suggested powerful contacts who could resolve situations. Daniel watched as if watching a spectacle. For him, the battle was only just beginning. True power lay in patience. As they argued, no one noticed that Eleanor was crying silently. Her mother knew that will wasn't just a redistribution. It was a death sentence. Because when siblings become rivals, every word becomes a knife, every secret becomes a bullet, and in that gilded mansion, the fortune was already stained with blood. That same night, someone copied the document. No one knew who, but by morning, copies were circulating discreetly. One employee found a crumpled piece in the fireplace. Another saw papers in Richard's pocket. Jonathan received an anonymous call. "The will is no longer a secret. The world will know." It was just the beginning. Michael tried to control the damage. "We can renegotiate, revise clauses, keep everything quiet." But Jonathan didn't want to renegotiate. He wanted revenge. Richard wanted revenge. Claire wanted to manipulate. Daniel wanted to observe a little longer. Eleanor wanted peace, and William could no longer want anything. The game was on. The secret will had turned the mansion into a trap. Doors slammed shut. The safe, once a symbol of wealth, was now a prison of truths. Every footstep echoed heavily. The atmosphere was no longer one of mourning, it was one of conspiracy. And in the heart of that house, a certainty loomed. Blood would be spilled for fortune. The following week, lawyers began receiving anonymous calls. Forged documents appeared in newspapers. A mysterious contract appeared in a hidden safe. The division of the Parker fortune had become both public and private at the same time. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one knew the full truth. This mystery was even more lethal. Jonathan swore he would never lose the empire. Richard swore he would take what was his. Michael swore he would protect the rule of law, even if distorted. Claire swore she would dictate the terms. Daniel swore nothing. He simply waited. In every silence a warning, in every look a threat. The will was pure gunpowder. Eleanor alone burned her husband's old letters. "You left us a curse," she murmured. The flames reflected in her tired eyes. She knew the fire consumed paper, but not memories. And soon it wouldn't just be burning paper, it would be flesh, blood, and deadly betrayal, and nothing could stop the collapse. Richard began carrying a notebook hidden in his pocket. In it, he recorded Jonathan's movements, suspicious encounters, and the times the safe was opened. For him, every detail was a clue. Every clue, proof, and every piece of evidence would be the weapon he used to overthrow his older brother and claim the Parker fortune. Jonathan intensified his shady Wall Street contacts. He met with brokers and business people willing to reverse troublesome documents. His calls were short, crisp phrases. Eliminate that clause. Delete that name. For him, the law wasn't an obstacle. It was a tool. But what he didn't see was that he was surrounded by enemies. Michael began sleeping in his office. The lights stayed on late. Papers piled up on his desk, scribbled with tense observations. He knew he could soon be accused of tampering with the will. His solution? Creating alternate versions, fake seals, and sham contracts. But every forgery is a risk that could explode. Claire became more active than ever. She used her social contacts like invisible blades. At cocktail parties, she would drop subtle phrases, "Not every fortune is solid. Some safes hide more than gold." Reporters picked up on it. Politicians whispered. She didn't need to arouse suspicion directly. She just had to plant seeds in fertile ground. Daniel silently began discreetly visiting his father's former allies. He met in dark cafes, listening to veiled stories about bribes and buried contracts. Each revelation was a missing piece. He didn't need to act quickly. While his brothers attacked each other, he put the pieces of the puzzle together. The youngest was already thinking about checkmate. Eleanor tried to be the balance, but she was surrounded. One night, she found an anonymous letter left on her bed. "Your empire will be destroyed from within." The paper smelled of cheap cigarettes, the smudged ink indicative of haste. The matriarch felt her heart freeze. Even within her own home, she was now nothing more than a target. An unknown lawyer showed up at the mansion asking for a meeting. He claimed to be representing a silent client. Opening the briefcase, he revealed partial copies of the will, obtained mysteriously. Michael recognized the risk. The document was no longer a secret. Someone was profiting from the division of the estate. The game had crossed the family line. Richard hired private investigators. In cold reports, he received evidence that Jonathan was diverting millions into international accounts. Photos, transfers, copies of emails. But each document was costly, and when he paid, Richard realized he was diving into the same quagmire he hated. To defeat his brother, he would need to get his own hands dirty. Jonathan suspected espionage. He installed hidden cameras in the mansion's hallways. He recorded meetings and followed every step. Watching the footage, he discovered Richard rummaging through the office, Michael burning papers, Claire talking to reporters. The eldest son clenched his fists. Everyone's against me. But he didn't know Daniel was watching too. In the basement, Daniel assembled his own archive. Folders, copies, audio files. He didn't plan to expose them immediately, but he was stockpiling ammunition. He knew the time would come when a document would be worth more than a bullet. Until then, he let his brothers devour each other. Every fight, every accusation, every hateful look silently strengthened him. Tensions boiled over at a dinner party. Jonathan accused Richard of cheating. Richard responded with a folder full of evidence. Michael tried to intervene, but Jonathan threw a glass against the wall. "I am Secco," echoed, shattering the marble floor. Eleanor screamed, "You're going to destroy this family." But it was too late. War had been declared. Claire took advantage of the fight to discreetly leave the room. In her bedroom, she called a trusted reporter. He said only one thing: "The Parker fortune is about to collapse." The journalist smiled on the other end. Within hours, rumors began circulating in the gossip columns. Insider secrets were already breathing into the outside world. Michael discovered that part of the will had been digitized and spread across anonymous servers. Any attempt to destroy the original would be futile. Someone had already guaranteed that the contents would survive. He felt a chill. He realized that, even as a lawyer, he no longer had control over anything. The will had a life of its own. Richard received a black envelope on his desk. Inside were photos of Jonathan in suspicious meetings, surrounded by dangerous men. A sentence in red: "He won't hesitate to eliminate you." Richard shivered. For the first time, he believed this wasn't just business. Betrayal was already walking towards deadly murder. Jonathan, suspicious, hired armed security guards. Discreet but cold, they circulated throughout the mansion, watching the hallways, monitoring movements. The once luxurious environment felt like a gilded prison. The brothers felt watched at every step. The glitter of the artwork no longer concealed the atmosphere of impending war. Claire, upon noticing the security guard's presence, stepped up her social maneuvering. She knew that public image was her greatest weapon. She organized a gala, inviting the press and politicians. "Let the world see that we're still a united family," she said with a smile. But behind the scenes, every detail of the party was a carefully laid trap. At the ball, Jonathan spoke about the solidity of the Parker fortune, but Richard interrupted with a sarcastic toast to truths that soon can no longer be hidden. The hall froze. Flashbulbs captured the moment. The audience laughed nervously, and in that instant, the gilded empire began to crack before the public's eyes. Michael rushed to contain the damage. He tried to negotiate with Richard privately. "We can split it, avoid scandal." But his brother responded coldly, "I don't want half, I want it all." The lawyer swallowed hard. He realized that no negotiation would save the family. They were all on an inevitable collision course, heading for mutual destruction. Daniel circulated among the guests, almost invisible. He observed, smiled discreetly, and listened to random remarks. A banker said, "Jonathan won't last 6 months." A socialite whispered, "Richard is playing dirty." Daniel simply absorbed the information. He was the only one who didn't need to expose himself. Patience was his sharpest weapon. Eleanor watched from the balcony. Her tearful eyes watched her children devour each other. She touched the ring on her finger, a symbol of a marriage that built an empire. She murmured to herself, "William, you left us a ticking time bomb." The music was jazz, but to her it sounded like a funeral march. She knew someone would fall soon. The morning after the ball, headlines painted a tense picture. Parker family collapse? Photos showed Jonathan and Richard arguing. Reporters camped out in front of the mansion. The gilded facade became a target of morbid curiosity. The American public loves the rise, but they love watching giants fall even more. Michael realized he needed to act quickly. He scheduled a secret meeting with outside counsel. But when he arrived, he found only a folder on the table. Inside, a copy of the will and a note. "You are no longer the sole guardian." His blood ran cold. He was being watched every step of the way. The conspiracy was already engulfing him. Richard tried to ally himself with Claire. "We can eliminate Jonathan together, divide the inheritance." She listened to him silently, then replied, "I don't share power. I take it." Her gaze was like a blade. Richard left trembling. He realized that even his sister could be his enemy. The Parker family no longer had ties, only knives. Jonathan planned a spur-of-the-moment trip to Miami to open parallel accounts. But before he could embark, he received an anonymous dossier in his suitcase, evidence that Richard was trying to manipulate the will. "He'll destroy it before you destroy it." Jonathan tore up the papers, but the seed had been planted. Paranoia was inevitable. Claire, in the dead of night, entered the office and photographed pages of the will with her cell phone. She stored them in encrypted folders and sent them to trusted journalists. Her logic was simple. The more public it was, the harder it was to manipulate. But this exposure could be costly, because sometimes light can kill. Daniel discovered an undisclosed clause. In the event of the violent death of an heir, his or her assets would be automatically redistributed among the surviving siblings. He closed the notebook slowly. For the first time he thought coldly, "So that's it." The will wasn't just a division, it was an invitation to crime. Eleanor called her children together for a final meeting. "You're turning gold into poison," Jonathan replied. "The poison was already here," Richard retorted. "You're the one who created this hell, Mother." Michael lowered his head. Claire smiled venomously. Daniel remained silent. The youngest son's silence was the most frightening of all. That night, cameras recorded shadows in the mansion. Someone entered the office at 3 in the morning. The safe was opened. The envelope was removed. But by dawn, no one had confessed. Everyone suspected everyone. The will was no longer in place, and thus was born the greatest mystery. Who held the key to the Parker empire? The conspiracy had become irreversible. Jonathan trusted only his bodyguards. Richard plotted in secret. Michael tried to save face. Claire played with the press. Daniel bided his time. Eleanor prayed, but her prayers were swallowed by cold walls. Inside the mansion, betrayal was as tangible as gold. In the dead of night the next morning, a gunshot rang out in the distance. It was unclear where it came from. Alarms went off. Doors slammed. The mansion awoke in chaos. But upon checking, nothing was found. Only a grim warning. The conspiracy was no longer silent. It was alive, armed, ready to consume the entire family. The Parker mansion, lit by crystal chandeliers, hosted the most lavish party of the year. Guests arrived in black cars, flashbulbs illuminated the entrance, and journalists shouted names. The air smelled of champagne and imported roses. But inside the family, the scent was of gunpowder. Everyone knew something was going to happen. Jonathan made a point of opening the party with a speech. Dressed in an impeccable suit, he raised his glass. "Today we celebrate unity, the continuity of our fortune." The guests applauded, but Richard laughed softly, almost mockingly. The metallic sound of the glass hitting the crystal seemed, to him, a prelude to disaster. Claire glided across the room in a red dress, each step calculated. She kissed politicians on the cheek, whispered to business people, smiled for the cameras. Behind her painted lips, she kept a secret. She had evidence hidden on her phone, ready to be released at any moment. For her, that night was a stage. Michael was restless. He watched his brothers, counting seconds, analyzing expressions. He felt his legal control slipping from his grasp. In his pocket, he carried a copy of the will. He fingered the paper nervously, as if the physical contact were a lucky charm. But deep down, he knew that this document was his verdict. Daniel remained on the sidelines. He drank slowly, observing. His gaze wandered between his brothers, but revealed no intentions. Some guests commented, "The youngest seems harmless." Little did they know that every detail he recorded would become a weapon. Daniel's silence was the most dangerous sound at that gilded party. The orchestra's jazz music mingled with rehearsed laughter, but in every corner of the room, groups whispered about the Parkers. Newspapers were already reporting a crisis. Politicians were avoiding future commitments. The empire, once seen as an example, was now a spectacle of decay. All of New York seemed to be watching, waiting for the downfall. Eleanor, in the center of the room, tried to maintain her image as a strong matriarch. She smiled mechanically, but her eyes betrayed her weariness. She approached Jonathan and Richard, who were arguing in low voices. "Not today," she pleaded, but neither of them listened. The anger between them was louder than any plea for peace. Richard finally broke down. He grabbed the microphone and stopped the music. "As we toast, remember, not all wealth comes clean, not all fortune is fair." The room froze. Eyes turned to the stage. Jonathan clenched his fists. Michael felt his heart drop. Claire smiled, satisfied. Daniel just watched. Jonathan took the stage immediately. "Don't listen to a frustrated man," he told the audience. "Parker Enterprises is still going strong." But his voice trailed off mid-sentence. From Richard's pocket emerged a black folder. He held it up theatrically. "You want the truth? It's all here." The room was completely silent. Michael stepped forward in panic. "Don't do this, Richard." But his brother opened the briefcase before the flashes. Papers flew, reporters recorded them. Illegal signatures, secret clauses, evidence of corruption. Each sheet was a public stab at the Parker Empire, and the shocked audience didn't know whether to applaud or recoil in horror. Claire took advantage of the chaos. She whispered to a journalist, "This is just the beginning." She sent files from her cell phone. Minutes later, headlines began popping up on websites. Parker secrets revealed at prom. The news spread faster than the security guards could react. The golden fortune was being torn apart before everyone's eyes. Jonathan lost control. He lunged at Richard and pushed him in front of everyone. "You've always been a traitor," he shouted. The dull thud of his body hitting the table echoed. Glasses shattered, red wine dripping like blood onto the white tablecloth. The scene seemed a terrible omen. The audience held their breath. Richard stood up, bloodied by shrapnel. He grabbed Jonathan by the collar and shouted, "This fortune isn't yours! Father knew it!" The revelation chilled the hall. The guests murmured. William's name echoed like a ghost, and for the first time, Jonathan seemed to lose his arrogant bearing. The throne swayed beneath his feet. Michael tried to intervene, but was pushed away. He fell onto the table, scattering more documents. Claire, seizing the opportunity, lifted her cell phone and displayed an image on the giant screen, a copy of the secret will. The revelation was complete. Every guest, every camera saw what should have remained buried. The empire was bleeding. Daniel finally stood up. He approached the stage and said in a calm voice, "You don't understand. This will doesn't divide the fortune, it destroys us all." The words echoed like a sentence. The audience fell silent. But before anyone could react, a metallic crash cut through the party. The safe had been opened. Outside, security guards rushed in. But inside the hall, everyone saw. Someone had appeared with a revolver. The weapon gleamed in the golden light. Screams echoed. Jonathan paled. Richard froze. Michael froze. Claire smiled cynically. Daniel simply closed his eyes. The family's fate was seconds away from being sealed. The shot echoed like thunder. The glass Eleanor was holding fell and shattered on the marble. Wine spilled out, mingling with the blood that now stained the floor. The body fell heavily before the horrified crowd, and the Parker residence, a stage of luxury and power, became the scene of a deadly murder. Sirens cut through the New York night, long howls like laments, click-click of cameras. Reporters invaded the grid, microphones extended. The blood-stained mansion became a crime scene. The orchestra fell silent. Glasses froze in midair. The crystal's gleam now reflected fear. An empire in shock, a family in ruin. NYPD detectives stormed the room. "No one leaves!" Gloves, tags, photos. The marble floor looked like a blank page scrawled with shrapnel, a body under a blanket. The smell of gunpowder and expensive perfume mingled. Secrets were everywhere, like dust, and every face bore hidden truths too much. Jonathan tried to assert authority. "Lawyers are already on their way." The lieutenant didn't lift his head from his pad. "Today, you're just a witness." The word weighed like lead. Empire Parker wouldn't buy that moment. Their betrayal cost more than gold. Who killed by fortune pay the balance? Richard trembled near the bar. A paramedic cleaned a thin cut from the glass. Was it an accident? It was fate. The answer was bitter. He looked at the sheet and thought about the will, hidden fortune, coup legal, disloyalty inherited. How do you fight for one? Treasure, when the ground itself swallows the steps. Michael showed his credentials. "I'm the family's lawyer." The detective replied dryly. "Then you know all this goes to the chain of custody." Michael swallowed. Papers were once power, now proof. He felt the squeeze of metallic click-off handcuffs as an omen, even without using them. Laws can be blades. Claire replaced her lipstick in the cracked salon mirror. Her smile was brief, her eyes steely. "The press is unforgiving," she whispered, and she sent 2 more files. Secrets illuminated ones don't heal, they burn. In minutes, trending topics, family betrayal, murder, fortune. The public loves glamour. They are addicted to the fall. Daniel walked to the window. Absolute silence. He watched the flashes like icy fires. When everything is a lie, the truth arrives late, but it arrives. He sounded like a tired mentor. The youngest was the belle of a rare conscience in that house. But even he knew mystery's open spaces attract predators. Eleanor placed her hand on the piano, fingers steady, soul trembling. "Enough," she said to the void. But the void didn't obey. Every note reminded her of William, every painting, a confidentiality. The matriarch understood. What raised the empire was discipline. What would bring him down would be deadly betrayal. Greed does not accept half-truths. Forensic experts found residue on the broken glass. Champagne and something else. The phrase ran like a blade through their ears. Shot and glass. 2 narratives, one end. Murder, you don't need to choose method, you choose opportunity. And that night, the clock in the hall marked a time that no one could undo. In the library, the safe left marks. It was opened during the event. The detective photographed the displaced panel. Behind it, a second safe, modern, silent. Who has the key? Stone silence. Hidden fortune breathes like a beast. When gold asks for air, the family offers blood. Bloodstained mansion, literal. The PR team made a chain call. Official statement in 30 minutes. But the rumor spread faster. Gura Parker explodes at gala. On Wall Street, screens flashed. Stocks fluctuated. Wealth hates uncertainty. And that morning the market smelled uncertainty. Hidden truths exposed. The body was removed, thump heavy on the stretcher. The crowd held their breath. Death, there, wasn't a statistic. It was a message. In the hallway, the sound of the stretcher sounded like a metronome of guilt. Those who shoot don't kill alone. They kill with all the gazes that decided to sell silence. Coup tactique is also a moral choice. Interrogations began in separate rooms. Jonathan held his chin high. They envy my success. Richard, his fists clenched. They stole my destiny. Michael, too technical. Without a lawyer, I won't answer. Claire, theatrical. My only vice is the truth. Daniel, serene. No one here is innocent. Someone was lying very well. The prosecutor on duty requested the full preservation of the devices. Cell phones on the tray. Clack of seal boxes. Claire glared at the detective. Without my phone, you'll collapse the narrative. He smiled. Maybe we'll save you from your own. Secrets have digital traces. Betrayal leaves metadata. The press surrounded the fence. Who died? The question hung like hail. The lieutenant, no comment. The silence turned to gasoline. Influencers created timelines. Podcasts were on call. Fortune Parker fed the news like a hungry bonfire. When luxury burns, the public warms. In the early hours of the morning, Michael received an anonymous email. Look for Clause 14B. He shivered. That section laughed at prudence. Redistribution in violent death, killed by fortune-created instant winners. What protects a empire becomes an invitation to crime when the wrong hands hold the pen. The will was a match. Jonathan called an allied senator. Voicemail. Short message. I need protection. The callback never came. When wealth, it reeks of scandal, alliances evaporate. He stared at his own reflection in the window. Perfect suit, cracked soul. Who wants me dead? Who wants me broke? Maybe both. Richard was led into the garden to breathe. The air smelled of wet grass and guilt. He touched the cold fence. I just wanted justice. A voice behind him. Justice or the throne? He didn't answer. In the Parker family, hidden truths are more poisonous than lies. The question hung like a blade. Claire tried to negotiate with the detective. I can name names, but I need time. He didn't blink. Give me facts, not plays. She laughed humorlessly. The socialite understood that the audience had changed. These were no longer cocktails. They were evidence. And evidence doesn't applaud. Evidence overturns. Family betrayal, there is no makeup that can hold it. Daniel received a short message. Meet on the terrace, now. He went. He found only wind and an envelope stuck under the chair. Photos of the open safe, a hand with a ring, a set time, mystery in black and white. Whoever uses you, chooses you. He doubled the images. Patience acquires teeth when it touches the abyss. Eleanor descended the stairs with as much dignity as possible. She stopped in front of the lieutenant. I want the best for my children. The officer replied, sometimes the best thing is to lose, she understood. Treasure that protects becomes a cage. Empire who feeds becomes a beast. And no mother feeds a monster without getting hurt. The prosecutor's office requested a warrant to search offices on Park Avenue. Servers, safes, flash drives, Klakov seals, BIP backups. The city woke up with police cars on the marble sidewalk. Pedestrians took pictures. What a soap opera, someone said. It wasn't a soap opera. It was murder, betrayal, fortune, and real consequences. The preliminary certificate indicated death by trauma and possible chemical contamination. 2 paths, 2 weapons, 2 hands, or a 4-handed plan. The lieutenant shook his head. When greed writes the script, the final scene has versions. Who supports the blood-stained mansion usually rehearses lies. Wall Street opened lower for Parker Enterprises. Investors called in panic. Reduce exposure. Analysts repeated, legal risk, moral hazard. Wealth that depends on trust melts in the heat of scandal. In cold rooms, heat maps flashed red. Gold lost its luster in the spotlight. Michael visited the morgue. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and silence. He signed a paper without looking. Formality. The coroner looked up. Nothing is formal when someone dies. He tightened his grip on the pen. If the law is armor, there it became a burden. There is no clause that cures deadly betrayal. Jonathan returned to the mansion under escort. The grandfather clock struck tak-tak as he crossed the hallway. The art room still displayed the crooked Warhol frame. An echo of irony. Luxury seemed to laugh. "Did I lose?" he asked the void. The void responded with wind. Secrets they do not console. They charge. Richard walked to the small chapel at the back of the lot. He sat, his eyes fixed on the blue stained-glass window. If I fall, they win. The thought bit him. Win what? A poisoned inheritance? A glass crown? He wept silently once. Then he dried his tears. In family wars, tears are too expensive a luxury. Claire gave a controlled interview as she left. We trust in justice. The smile didn't reach her eyes. The camera focused on her sparkling necklace. Comments poured in. Cynical, cold, drama queen. She knew image is currency, and currency buys time. The question is, does it buy acquittal when betrayal is it public? Daniel sent copies of the photos to the prosecutor, unsigned. He chose the legal route for now. The email contained one sentence: start with the right safe. He understood that chess required sacrifice. Sometimes the pedestrian crosses the board, sometimes it becomes memory. But the game must go on. Until checkmate. Eleanor closed the east wing. No one comes in. She ordered paintings to be covered, silver to be put away, lights to be turned off. Blood-stained mansions seemed to shrink. Low ceilings, long corridors, shallow breaths. Luxury suffocates when it loses its narrative. Gold doesn't sing, it creaks. And the creaking awakens ghosts. The prosecutor called a press conference. The investigation follows 3 lines: safe, cup, clauses. 3 keys to a safe mysteries. The audience took note, satisfied. The case had everything: fortune, intrigue, stage. All that was missing was the truth, always the last to arrive when the family betrayal occupies the center. At Greenwood Cemetery, they prepared a brief wake. A closed funeral, the family said. White flowers, short speeches, cameras outside. Controlled luxury, directed grief. Some wept for love, others for future losses. In wills like these, every tear has a market value. As they were leaving, a journalist shouted, "Who will inherit now?" The question hurt more than a secret. Michael stared at the asphalt. Jonathan clenched his jaw. Claire feigned composure. Richard didn't even look away. Daniel made a mental note. The world's hunger for an answer is the same one that devours the soul of the one who gives it. Back at the mansion, an unmarked envelope waited at the front door. Inside, a single sentence cut from a newspaper. The gold that feeds the house feeds the snake. Eleanor closed her eyes. The cut was clean, deep. Treasure does not protect against metaphor, and metaphors kill more slowly and hurt more. The lawyers gathered in the map room. Containment strategy now. There were boards with organizational charts, arrows, deadlines, words like shielding, conciliation, secrecy. But the entire wall reeked of fear, hidden truths. They charge high interest, and the bill was already due that grey afternoon. The lieutenant returned with an extra warrant. We will open the second safe. Thebip failed 3 times, then clack inside were flash drives, cold keys, and a contract with an unknown signature. Michael paled. This isn't ours, the detective smirked. It's the state's now. Empire lost another room. Jonathan received notice, passport withheld. Precaution! He laughed, but it was a broken laugh. Golden prison, it began before the bars. A man can live in a penthouse and still not leave the place. Sometimes the elevator goes up, sometimes it free falls. The lobby is the marble courtroom. Richard tried to find solace in his work. Open the office. His partner closed the folder. Not today. He understood. When the name becomes synonymous with betrayal, contracts evaporate. Customers don't buy storms. And the Parker brand was now a leaden cloud over the city that once applauded its brilliance. Claire received a threatening message. "Drama princess, the next headline will be yours." She blocked it, took a deep breath, and regained her composure. In public wars, elegance is a shield. But shields crack. The Mirror revealed a woman who knew too much and trusted too little. Beauty is fragile under the judicial spotlight. Daniel entered his father's room, still intact. The table clock showed the Semitic tact disciplined. He picked up William's old diary. Wealth without character creates living orphans. He closed the notebook slowly. The youngest felt the weight of an inheritance that doesn't fit in safes. It fits in choices and scars. At night, the mansion fell silent. Doors locked, lights dimmed, footsteps echoing. The distant sound of the Hudson sounded like tired breathing. Secrets sleep poorly. Mysteries became feverish, and when the whole house was to blame, the walls dripped with memories. No one slept, neither those who pretended nor those who lied. In the morning paper, the headline, "Who killed for fortune?" The printed question became a collective mirror. Madeira's a spectacle, traction as an algorithm, fortune as a national vice. The town drank coffee, staring into the Parker abyss, and some whispered it could be any family with too much gold. The prosecutor closed the day with a phrase, "The next move won't be the press's, it will be ours." The promise sounded like a hammer. Inside the Parker residence, everyone understood it in their own way. For some, relief. For others, panic. When the state enters the game, treasure loses the crown. Eleanor turned off the lights in the main hall. Before leaving, she stared at the spot where blood had stained the marble. She saw, for a second, the image of a fallen glass, loop cruel of a lifetime. "Greed destroys. The truth always comes," she whispered. The echo answered. Night closed the curtains. The next act awaited. Jonathan began walking the hallways in a suit even at night. He slept little, always armed with paranoia. The brilliance of the artworks was no longer a source of pride, but rather a watch. In every reflection, he saw an enemy. The penthouse on Park Avenue had become a bunker. But the bunker didn't protect him from his own mind. Richard locked doors 3 times before bed. He kept knives under his pillow. Silence to him had sound. The wind sounded like footsteps, the wood like breathing. He dreamed of his father saying, "You'll never be worthy." He woke sweating, convinced that even his dreams were trying to steal him. Gold doesn't heal scars. Michael had been collecting stacks of papers, but now the contracts made no sense. The letters jumbled together, the clauses sounded like sentences. He read and reread, "In case of violent death," and closed his eyes. The will was a sentence repeated on a loop. The law, once an ally, now devoured him from within. Claire closed thick curtains, fearing invisible lenses. Her vanity turned to paranoia. She spent hours in front of the mirror, but not to admire herself, to look for cracks in her face, signs of defeat. She knew every flash of light caught on the street would be interpreted as guilt. Beauty in scandal becomes a cracked mask. Daniel was the only one walking freely, but even he felt a weight on his shoulders. The mansion seemed to whisper. The walls told stories of ancient betrayals. His father's secret diary echoed in his mind. Wealth without character creates living orphans. He no longer knew if he was an heir or an orphan. Eleanor secluded herself in the East Wing. She lived with lit candles and whispered prayers. She heard footsteps that weren't there, voices that weren't hers. She touched the ring on her finger like an anchor, but the anchor held nothing back. For her, Golden Prison was the cruelest, remembering that he created monsters inside his own home. The mansion's corridors, once filled with music and celebration, now echoed like a labyrinth. Doors slammed shut. The creaking of wood sounded like a muffled scream. Every room was a cell, every window a glass cage. The luxury didn't hide the fact. The gold had become shackles, shiny but suffocating. Jonathan began to see shadows in the mirror. A shadow passed behind him, always out of focus. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the room. For him, every reflection showed Richard's face. Every reflection was an accusation, but the greatest accusation lay within, the fear of losing the crown, and with it, his very soul. Richard dreamed of blood. He heard the thump of the body falling repeatedly. He saw the black folder opening by itself, spitting out papers like blades. He woke gasping, convinced someone was watching him. He put his hands over his mouth, as if he could hold his breath. But whoever breathes guilt breathes poison. Michael was seen talking to himself. He mumbled clauses like prayers, revocation, succession, clause 14b. Employees whispered that he no longer knew the difference between law and nightmare. The lawyer, who had always believed in the power of the letter, was now trapped in words that suffocated him. The will was no longer a document, it was a curse. Claire filled the bathtub with champagne but didn't get in. He watched the bubbles burst. As if secrets were escaping, he smiled humorlessly. Her image in fashion magazines was already being used as satire. Drama queen. With each article, her prison grew tighter. Public luxury. Private ruin. Daniel spent hours in the library. He read books he didn't fully understand, but every page was an excuse to remain silent. He jotted down loose sentences, connected symbols. For him, silence was a weapon, but even silence weighs heavily. And in Golden Prison, even those who observe feel the weight of being locked up. Eleanor saw shadows of her husband. She felt William sitting at the piano, playing non-existent notes. He whispered, "You left us a curse." Tears fell onto the cold keys. She knew the gold wouldn't go with her to the grave, but the guilt would. Guilt is an inheritance that doesn't need a will. The walls began to smell musty, even though they were polished. The marble looked cracked, even though it was intact. Blood-stained mansion breathed decadence. Luxury no longer disguised it. There was an invisible presence, as if the house itself held the memory of the crime, and each inhabitant was a prisoner of his own shadow. Jonathan began writing letters to no one. In each one, he asked his father for forgiveness. Then he burned them. The fire reflected on his face like a confession. He understood, too late, that wealth without peace, nothing is worth it. But understanding was not absolution. It was simply realizing that the prison was inside him. Richard drank too much. Empty whiskey glasses piled up like dead soldiers. The smell permeated the air. "I am the true heir," he repeated to himself. But each sip was a defeat. The gold he desired was already slipping away. And he knew. Those who drink against ghosts end up toasting with them. Michael tried to escape work, but clients disappeared, contracts evaporated. Papers, and more papers remained. None of them worked. Revoke, revise, rewrite. But the past cannot be rewritten. The past is a sentence. And he, the family's lawyer, became the prison's own lawyer, a prisoner with a pen. Claire gazed out at the city from her balcony. The lights of New York flickered like judges' eyes. "They want a show," he murmured, and I knew she'd keep giving. But inside, she was no longer an actress. She was a defendant. The Parker residence stage no longer shone. It was a gilded cell with an infinite audience. In the silent dawn, Daniel found an envelope under the library door. Yellowed paper, firm writing. In the corner, William Parker's seal, the dry title, Final Declaration. His heart raced. The feeling was clear. That document was the key that connected the beginning to the end. He opened it slowly. The words sounded like a sentence. Whoever destroys the family out of greed will inherit nothing. The fortune should be preserved only by those who understand the price of truth. It was the patriarch's last will, never revealed. It wasn't just a testament. It was a confession, a warning, a curse. Daniel took a deep breath and carried the envelope into the main room. All the brothers were awake, caught up in their paranoia. He placed the document on the marble table, in the same place where the metallic click of the safe had echoed weeks before. The mansion seemed to hold its breath. Jonathan snatched the paper furiously. Bullshit! He would never have written that. But the handwriting was unmistakable. The sentences cut deeper than bullets. Richard smiled bitterly. I always knew you weren't worthy. Claire narrowed her eyes, calculating. Michael simply murmured, It's legitimate. Silence fell across the room. Eleanor entered slowly. She touched the paper with trembling fingers. William knew. He tried to save us from ourselves. Tears streamed down her face. But you killed what was left of honor. Her voice sounded like lamentation and judgment. For the first time, her children had no defense. The weight of the truth crushed them. Jonathan exploded. This paper is worthless without power. He advanced on Richard, repeating the initial confrontation. The shove, the scream, the fury, the scene replayed in a loop. But this time there were more eyes, more evidence, more blood in the memory. The beginning and the end met on the same stage. Richard reacted violently. The table overturned. Glasses fell. The dry sound echoed as it had on the night of the ball. But unlike that time, there was no outside audience. Only the family, trapped in their golden labyrinth. The fight was no longer for contracts. It was for survival, for pride, for ghosts that never die. Michael tried to pull them apart, but fell. Claire didn't move. Daniel just watched. For him, tragedy was inevitable. William's letter hadn't brought anyone together. It had only shown how lost they were. Secrets they don't save. They only reveal, and once revealed, they burn. The Parker residence burned without fire. Jonathan stumbled, knocking over a vase. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the hall. The same symbol from the beginning, the same reflection of blood on the marble. The loop closed, the broken cup, the body on the floor. The empire cracked. There was no redemption. Greed leaves no survivors. Daniel held up the letter and said calmly, William's inheritance wasn't gold, nor buildings, nor safes. It was this warning, greed destroys, and we haven't learned. His eyes swept the room. Each brother, cowering in their guilt, knew the youngest was right, but it was too late. Outside, reporters still watched the mansion. When the lights went out, a whisper ran through the crowd. What else are they hiding? The question hung in the air. Because in New York, no secret remains hidden. The truth always comes out. And when it does, it comes back with blood. The Parker residence, once a symbol of glory, had become a gilded ruin. The skyscrapers and vaults no longer mattered. What remained were locked doors, corridors echoing with secrets, and a family torn apart. The fortune that was supposed to unite had become a prison they all shared. The gold shone, but it didn't illuminate. Jonathan, Richard, Michael, Claire, and Daniel learned too late that inheritance isn't measured in dollars. Each lost something: confidence, peace, dignity. The empire their father built with ambition crumbled under the weight of its own foundation, greed and silence. Because hidden treasures always find someone to reveal them. The lesson was clear: when ambition overrides truth, the price is too high. No contract, no clause, no safe deposit box can save those who bargain to their souls. The Parker's story echoed as a universal warning. Family betrayal never ends in victory. only in ashes. And in the end, only the patriarch's certainty remained. Wealth without character creates living orphans. The Parker Enterprises might survive legally, but the family was essentially dead, and the city watched, remembering that every empire falls sooner or later. Truth, inevitably, always exacts its toll. And that wasn't the only fortune lost amid deadly betrayals. How many golden mansions hide secrets that should never come to light? Can greed really buy silence? Or does it always end in blood? Subscribe, share, and come back to discover other hidden fortunes that change destinies forever.